Hi, I'm Jim Brett, President and CEO of the New England Council. Thanks for tuning in to this month's episode of Inside the Corner Office, where we catch up with the leaders of some of our region's most well-respected businesses and organizations to learn more about their career paths and about the institutions they lead. This month, I sat down with the new CEO of Massport, Richard Davey, to talk about the latest developments at Logan Airport, Worcester Regional Airport, and the Port of Boston. We also discussed the impact of President Trump's tariffs on the port and the urgent need for federal investment to modernize our air traffic control system. As always, I thank you for tuning in, and I hope you enjoyed this episode. Rich, thanks very much for the opportunity to chat with you today, and it's a great honor to be here at Massport, which is the headquarters of Logan Airport, and it's a thrill to be here to see the airport in action.
Thank you.
You have an incredible career in infrastructure transportation. One, you served as the Secretary of Transportation here, and then you had another stint in New York as the head of the largest and the oldest transit system in the United States. I guess the question is, what sparked the interest in your early background to say, you know what, I'd like to pursue this kind of career in this area?
It's a great question. It's not like I had, toy trains growing up or a Matchbox. I think I probably did, but it was not that. I'm an attorney by trade, if you will. I also went to Jesuit high school, college, and law school. So service is a big component of how I think about my career and giving back. So, but transportation was a bit almost random. So I was working in New York at a law firm when 9/11 happened, and frankly had a 9/11 moment and said, you know what, this is not what I do with my career. So I quit the job 6 months after, moved back home here to Massachusetts, to Boston, and ended up volunteering on a political campaign. A person who ran for governor in 2002. And in that campaign, I became the deputy issues director, and in that campaign, transportation was one of the policy pieces that I became responsible for. So 23 years ago, by total happenstance, and that's where I began to, I think, grow an appreciation for and ultimately a love for transportation infrastructure. So from there, commuter rail and the T and MassDOT, et cetera. But that was the beginning, was frankly 9/11, and moving back home and just saying, I want to do something different, and transportation and infrastructure really came to me. And then from there, started working for the commuter rail company, the previous company, MBCR, as their counsel in 2003. So after the election, that's where I started my career, if you will, in transportation.
And how did you end up being the secretary?
So, fast forward, I was at commuter rail for 7 years, became ultimately the CEO, and when Governor Patrick was looking for GM of the MBTA, I got hired to run the T in the spring of 2010, and did that for him for about 18 months. And my predecessor, Jeff Mullen, was leaving the post as transportation secretary, and the governor asked me to step up, I guess, and become secretary in the fall of 2011. So, that was the sort of the journey, if you will.
Yeah, right. I know you're a Boston native and a very proud alum of the College of Holy Cross.
Indeed.
And but you've spent some time in New York and running the largest and oldest public transit system in North America. What kind of challenges did you face there, and as well as the experience that you got there?
Yeah. So as you mentioned, New York City Transit carries about 6.5 million people a day. If you can imagine, if you add up the next 7 largest transit systems in America, New York is still bigger. So the scale is tremendous, and I think regardless of sort of who you are in New York, your income level, your demographic, most New Yorkers rely on the subway system. So everyone has a subway story in particular. So what did I learn? It mattered. I took the job. The communications director there told me the media only covers two things consistently in New York: the weather and the subway, because it impacts all New Yorkers. So that gave you a sense for how much of an eye that would be on us. But to me, it's kind of boils down to the basics, which is, most folks who use infrastructure and transportation just want to get from point A to point B as efficiently and as reliably and as quickly as possible. And that was the same for New Yorkers. Now, they might express their opinions a little differently, maybe a little harsher than Boston or other cities, but so it was our job to do that. And when we weren't doing that, telling folks how we were going to fix it or how we were going to improve it. And that's what I loved about the job in New York is New Yorkers embraced that. They weren't expecting perfection. They wanted consistency, but they also understood that there were huge challenges to a system that hadn't been invested in decades. But they would, reward you and praise you, if you will, if you showed progress and you showed improvement, which is what we did in the 2 years I was there. I'm very proud of that. And frankly, since I've departed, the team has continued to build upon that. I've been watching and rooting their success since I left last year, and they've done some great things.
So how has that experience prepared you for this job here?
So I think the complexities of a subway system and running a system in New York certainly prepare you for the job of running Massport. The footprint is smaller in terms of employees and customers. But the flip side is, between our aviation, maritime, and real estate portfolio, we have a pretty diverse number of businesses here. And so I think thinking about New York certainly prepares you for that. And the same is the customer reliance question, right? Folks are wanting to move goods and services. They want to be able to move through Logan Airport seamlessly, reliably, safely, efficiently. And just taking some of those customer lessons in particular here and applying them here has boded us well.
Obviously, when you heard that this Massport CEO opening was about to go public, obviously you said to yourself, I'm coming home. This is the job for me. And you applied, and you got it.
Yeah. No, I wasn't sure. I thought I was a qualified candidate, but I certainly did and had some great conversations with the board. I also was pretty open with the board too. At this point in my career, I want to take a job that I think that I like, but I'm also going to be good for and right for. And the board talked about a few attributes that they were looking for in a new CEO. One of them was someone who could lead a new strategic plan. And that's a job that I've done both in the private and the public sector. And then two is ground transportation, particularly getting to and from Logan Airport. And really that's my expertise. I don't fly planes, but I am a ground transportation expert, having worked for 20 years in the business. And so in particular, thinking about the to and from the airport has been a big part of our job, and frankly I think our job over the next few years. We expect Logan to grow, notwithstanding the current economic uncertainty. We think the overall projections are going to hold true, that we could be 10 more million customers over here in the next 10 years. That would be a 20% increase from where we are today.
43 million now?
About 43 million, exactly.
Wow.
And we could get to 53 million by 2035. And, no one's talking about building a third tunnel over here anytime soon or a new transit line. So how do we get folks here? So the board, I think, not only was looking for someone who had strategic planning as a background, but also ground transportation expertise, other things too. And that was an attractive part of this job. Was I think what the board was looking for matched my interests and my skills. So,
Massport is best known for being in charge of Logan Airport. What are some of your, goals for the future in the next 5 years for this airport?
Yeah, for the airport in particular, there's a few. I think one is continuing to improve how people get to the airport, right? And so, but let me take a step back. One of my big goals is to be a top 3 to 5 airport for customer satisfaction. So say by like J.D. Power and Associate. So 2 years ago, Massport was ranked 16th in America of mega airports, and there are about 33, 35 mega airports in the U.S. Last year we were 10th, so we moved up. It's the first time we've been in the top 10, but we were number 10. I'd like to see us in the top 3 or 5 in the coming 5 years. And so that means a few things. It means improving our customer experience, so whether that's concessions or, as I mentioned earlier, getting to the airport, our signage, cleanliness, our Wi-Fi, our baggage claim, really thinking about the total customer experience over there. I mean, that's going to be key. The second thing is really looking at where we can improve destinations. I'd love to go to India. I'd love us to have a flight to India. We're not there yet, but something we're working on. A few other destinations in Europe where I think there are some holes in the map, and then also South America too. I also think we're looking at things like remote terminals, and so being able to drive to one of our Logan Express sites in Braintree or Framingham, for example, and being able to park, check in, go through TSA security there, get on a sterile bus there, and be driven to Logan Airport, but be dropped off on the other side of the airport, on the secure side. We're excited about that, and I hope to be piloting that next year. So, improving the customer experience, our destinations, we have really strong relationships with the airlines, Delta and JetBlue in particular. I expect those will continue. But those are a few of our goals for sure.
I was got to mention about the destinations. That has been a top priority of Massport to just add additional destinations. I read somewhere, I think you had like 59 international destinations.
That's right.
And more to come. What are some of the more that you like to get in the future?
Yeah, so India for sure. I think
India.
Yeah, so I think that matches certainly both the economy here, our eds and meds, and then there are a few holes in, I would say, in Europe in particular. Krakow is actually a really interesting destination where there's both business and leisure opportunities. South America, we have a few destinations in South America. I'd love to see us doing some more. And look, in the future, if our national relationship improves with China, I'd love to see some more opportunities to fly to China again. In fact, we had, more service to China 7 or 8 years ago, but with some of the, some of the international challenges we've had with that nation, it's been cut back a bit. But I think there's opportunity for us to do more business in Asia and Southeast Asia, for that matter.
And you now have a flight to Dubai.
We do, yeah. We have the Middle East has been a big growth area for us, Abu Dhabi as well. A lot more business being done in the Middle East for sure. And I think we'll probably continue again, given the strong Massachusetts economy, eds and meds, for example, and just being a gateway to all that we have here in New England for sure. So hopefully there'll be more opportunities. The other good thing in the last 10 or 15 years is, in the past, airlines would have needed to put 400 or 500 people on a plane to go to Narita or to go to Abu Dhabi to make it financially successful. But given aircraft technology, so the reduction in fuel usage, for example, the premium services that they're offering as well, and even cargo in the belly of these planes is generally lucrative for the airlines. Now, a market like Boston is very doable from an economic perspective in the last 10 or 15 years.
Have you done a study to show what the economic impact would be on the region with all these international flights here?
Well, what we know is that Massport has about a $22 billion economic impact for the region. So that's across our portfolio. So it's not only Logan and the other airports, Hanscom and Worcester, but it's also the seaport, the cruise port, and then our real estate holdings as well. So no doubt additional international flights would be incremental to that. But $22 billion for an organization of 1,400 people, it's not a big place. We rely on lots of partners to make our business work. It's pretty extraordinary. I always tell folks that I think we punch above our weight.
Yeah, right. I know that sustainability and mitigating the impact of that climate change is a huge priority for you and Massport, and you're working to bring more sustainable aviation fuel here to Logan. Can you talk about how well you're doing on that?
Sure. And so obviously climate change is real, and it's something that particularly for Logan Airport, surrounded by Boston Harbor, we have to be thoughtful about and we have to be thinking about for sure. And so 90% of the greenhouse gas emissions at Logan Airport come from aviation fuel. So we're changing all of our light bulbs, we're making our facilities, more energy efficient, we're reducing our greenhouse gas emissions, as you would expect from a facilities perspective, but electric cars, et cetera, but that's the number one issue. So, as you mentioned, we've really stepped up our game on sustainable aviation fuel. So we did a cross government report with 4 of Governor Healy's cabinet secretaries, a couple other agencies to put a roadmap for how we could develop, scale, and adopt sustainable aviation fuel in New England, so not just in Massachusetts, but in New England. We had a conference 2 weeks ago over at the Volpe Center, co-sponsored with, among other folks, MIT, to think about what that looks like. And so we put out a blueprint to work with the other airports in the region. We had other participants at that conference, and we feel like there's opportunities in the short term to look at things like tax credits that other states are doing, the European Union is doing, to encourage the adoption of SAF. There's a premium right now for SAF versus regular jet fuel. And then there are some really promising startups. There's actually 2 startup companies in Boston right now that are looking at ways to create true sustainable aviation fuel, which is to say based not on biomass or crop residue, for example. And so some really promising technology. So not only is this about reducing greenhouse gas emissions, Jim, but I think it's also about an economic development play for the state or the region as well.
Logan is not the only airport in Massport's portfolio. You have Worcester Regional Airport. I've been out there many times.
Thank you.
I believe Massport took it over in 2009.
That's right.
A lot of changes, a lot of growth.
Yeah.
Take a minute to talk about all the wonderful things going on at Worcester.
Yeah, so as part of transportation reform, state transportation reform in 2009, where MassDOT was created, among other things, Massport assumed the financial obligation and control of Worcester Airport from the city. And so with Massport's sort of relationships and balance sheet, we've made significant investments into the airport, I think over $100 million in the last few years. Better radar system, new gates, new security, and then leveraging relationships with the airlines, have been able to successfully bring back commercial service. Worcester didn't have commercial service for a number of years, and so now JetBlue, Delta, and American Airlines all fly out of Worcester today. So we're excited about that. Particularly the Florida flights work really well out of that Metro West, not quite Central Mass, but Metro West area. It's a great encatchment. And then American Airlines has recently announced, and they're shifting their New York service to Philadelphia. So actually, that'll be the 5th market that's now being served from Worcester. So we think opportunities for Worcester to continue to grow. But it's been a great investment, so much so that Worcester Airport in calendar year 2024 had the highest number of passengers that they've had in almost 35 years. So we're seeing a lot of excitement from folks in Metro West and Central Massachusetts, and frankly other states coming into Worcester and using the facility.
Another airport is Hanscom in Bedford. I didn't realize is it the busiest general aviation airport in New England?
It is.
I wasn't aware of that. Can you talk about the significance of that airport and how it fits into the economic landscape of New England?
Yeah, so Hanscom, really developed historically as an Air Force base, and over time has transitioned to a general aviation airport, but at the same time still has some research and development out there. The military has with a few private sector partners. Mm-hmm. It's developed now into really 3 areas: sort of general aviation, corporate aircraft, and then sort of single piston or propeller based, sort of recreational flying as well. Mm-hmm. but it's important for the economy for Massachusetts. So, for example, there are a number of large Fortune 500 or even larger companies who have private aircraft out in at Hanscom. Sports teams, for example, will fly in and out, both professional and collegiate, in fact. And then we have flight schools and repair that occurs up there as well. So it's a very busy. It's a busy airport, and it's part of our strategy to reduce the jet and corporate traffic here at Logan, and keeping this as commercial as possible, and having that airport be a reliever. It's been part of our strategy for 25 years plus.
And of course, the port in Massport is the port of Boston.
Mm-hmm.
And I do remember some 10 years ago, Massport worked with the congressional delegation in urging them to support the amendment of $10 million for the dredging of the Boston Harbor, and they were able to succeed in getting that amount. What has been done since then with that money in the port?
Yeah, so that was just seed money, and thankfully the delegation helped us come up with a couple $100 million when all was said and done. Mm-hmm. The state contributed and Massport contributed. I mean, overall, about $800 million was invested in the port to allow for, as you said, the dredging. Why was that important? Because the ships are getting bigger, heavier, and as a result, are need more depth to be. We also installed new cranes over there as well, and so we've continued to see the port do well for sure. I think again the current economic uncertainty, tariffs, for example, the longshoreman strike earlier this year. We did not see. We basically were on budget. We expect to see some growth there in the coming years. But as I like to tell folks, if you let's say bought a piece of furniture from a few stores around Boston or the region, if you have a bottle of Barolo at home, those no doubt came through the port. Mm-hmm. We import a lot of products from Europe and Asia through the port. And then we export a fair bit as well, products and raw materials. So it's a pretty busy place. I think it's a bit of an unsung hero in our portfolio. But those federal dollars help tremendously to not only keep the economic goods moving in and out of the port, but also we have a few hundred jobs down there as well for the longshoremen who are moving goods in and out every day. And if you ever think you have a tough job, Jim, I always think if I have a tough job, going down and looking at the crane movements and sitting 90 feet above giant boxes and moving those carefully and cautiously, I'm really impressed with what the longshoremen do down there.
There isn't a day that goes by that you don't read, hear, or see something involving around tariffs. Mm-hmm. You just mentioned it a little bit.
Yeah.
What do you see here on the commercial level as well as in the port?
Yeah.
The impact of the tariffs?
Well, clearly, tariff is just another word for tax, right? It's a cost of doing business that ultimately will be passed on to the end user, the end consumer. Someone buying a pair of sneakers or a new coffee table or a bottle
just
of
pass it on.
Barolo, right, as I mentioned. And so, so that's a challenge. And then there was some other talk of potentially adding more fees, for example, onto ports
from China
as well, and that has changed a bit, I think, in a positive way. But the ripple effects of charging more on goods and services coming through any port, not just Boston, is challenging. I get the policy to bring back or reshore shipbuilding, for example, and some other things, which is admirable policy, but you don't create shipbuilding industries overnight. You have to think about how long that takes to build up those industries and those skill sets. But that said, between the ILA strike, as I mentioned in September, it's a 3-day strike, and then the sort of on again, off again tariff question. And as you know, the economy, regardless of what party you're in, you don't like uncertainty, and so I think the market has reacted a bit to that. That said, we're actually we're likely to hit our budget this year, even though the budget looked like this for container volume, and it's been sort of up and down over the past 12 months because the market's acting rationally. My hope is that we get some certainty in whatever tariffs will be, and then the market will react, in concert, right? Because again, if we start reshoring some of the manufacturing of furniture or apparel, I suppose we're not going to make Barolo in America anytime soon. I think the Italians have that market, but that takes time. And so, again, thinking about balancing that policy with the idea that folks are going to have to pay more very quickly, the market's just going to be rational and react to that. So we're keeping an eye on it overall, but I think certainty is much better than uncertainty.
Of course, yeah. There's been a lot of talk about challenges with our air traffic control system and the need to reform, and the reconciliation bill that Congress is debating as we meet. I believe they've added $10.5 billion, both the House and the Senate, which is great.
Yeah.
What will that do to the system, though? I mean,
So a couple things. I think one is maybe just historical. Like just being just totally apolitical, nonpartisan. It's like there's a lot of blame to go around on this, right, over the years. So there's no surprise that air traffic controllers, so the people that are in the towers helping manage the air traffic system in America, have been understaffed for a long time. 90%-ish of the towers in the United States are understaffed, 90%, including here in Boston. Now, the Boston FAA team here is excellent, and they've been able to manage that. But others, places like Newark, for example, have really struggled. And what happens, so the airspace is safe, but what happens if there's understaffing or not enough people in towers to manage the air traffic? Well, fewer planes take off and fewer planes land. So congestion happens, right? So one, I'm heartened by the bill that's being debated to get literally more folks in the towers, right? And Secretary Duffy is owed credit. He's been looking at ways to look at the mandatory retirement age, which is pretty young. It's 57, 58. Yeah, right. Looking at ways maybe to bring some folks back, increase the pay without, but continue to keep the integrity of the training. The training's hard, should be. And so that is a good path, and that should continue. The second question is the technology. It's old technology, right? It's vintage 1960s, 70s, the radar system. And again, that's been bandied about next gen for a long, long time. And I think the Congress and the President seem to be very much focused on and being very serious about finally making the technology investments required to have a 21st century air traffic control system, which, by the way, will make the system more efficient. By the way, it'll actually help reduce greenhouse gas emissions, because if the flights are more efficient, that means they're burning less fuel, which means, by the way, if they're burning less fuel, it's actually cheaper to fly. So it just all, I think, is good news for both the consumer and the FAA. And I would encourage Congress and the President to move on that investment, because it's going to make our skies more efficient. You can be able to fly more, safer, and overall the kind of system I think Americans deserve.
We talked earlier about Massport's efforts to move the sustainable aviation jet fuel here. What can Congress do to help you on that?
Yeah, I think a few things. They could incentivize the adoption, right? So there could be tax credits, for example, to allow for either the purchase of or the production of. To me, this is, again, not a blue or red state question. There are states like California, but also places like Iowa that are pushing to have sustainable aviation fuel be part of the mix. The biggest refineries right now of sustainable aviation fuel are in California and Texas. Not bedfellows in policy necessarily, but important for. And I know there's also been an argument in the past about creating being energy independent, right? And so one way to do that is to really look at how a sustainable aviation fuel can be developed in the short term with, as I said, biomass or like fatty oils from crops, for example, but then the U.S. inventing the fuel of the future, which allows us to rely on nobody else on the planet for aviation fuel. So to me, this feels like a place where the parties can come together and really endorse a policy that, again, the air is cleaner, the fuel should be cheaper, we wouldn't rely on other countries to source it for us, and it encourages obviously flying, which is good for the economy. So, but I think Congress and the president can be thinking about that from a policy perspective, from an adoption perspective, an innovation perspective, and jobs, and then also being in states across the United States as well.
Well, with that, I just want to thank you. Thank you for taking the time to join me for this Inside the Corner office here at Massport, which has been a treat for me to be here and to catch up and to, quite frankly, to have you back in Boston. It's great to have you here. And I think it's safe to say that Massport is in very good hands with your leadership here.
I appreciate that.
So again, for those of you who are tuning in, I just hope you enjoyed as much as I did the opportunity to get to know Rich and learn more about Massport. And be sure to tune in next month when our guest will be Tess Kinney. And have a great day.
Thank you, Jim.